This morning we heard some very interesting elements of conservation, and I want to show how that fits into the international network within the CBD and CITES. We all know, I think now, the tenets, if you like, of the CBD to conserve sustainable use and access to benefit sharing. Now, I'm particularly interested to look at how that applies to Botanic Gardens and how we can work in that framework. And within the CBD itself, the main decision body, like an all UN convention, is the Conference of Parties, and the core scientific body is the substance. But within that framework, we have a range of working groups and national focal points. For example, there's a national focal point here in Jordan for the convention. If you look at the structure of CBD, it's one of the newer conventions, so it's very much a framework convention with the main work being carried out nationally. And one of the most important items, and we heard talk about this morning, to implement all these plans is a National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, which really brings everything together on a national level. If we look at the articles of the CBD, work through them, we really see how Botanic Gardens are core to the Biodiversity Convention. We hit the button on every one of these: identification and monitoring, we heard this morning, in situ conservation, ex situ conservation, always something to see back wearing an anorak. Sustainable use, we've heard this about medicinal plants overlaps with CITES, and that is new initiatives for a while, looking at the certification process, like we certify organic plants, for example. Now looking at how you certify sustainable trade. Research and training, identification and monitoring, as I said already, and moving into the public education and awareness, where Botanic Gardens have a fantastic opportunity. And just looking at some of the material that's already coming from your Botanic Garden, you're doing really, I think, fantastic work. Very simple, very clear, engaging the community, telling people what's really important about plants and how they're important in all our lives. I think that's a really important thing to do. Access to genetic resources, what we look at a little bit more detail, is one of the key tenets of the CBD. It makes Botanic Gardens, how we work, gives a framework, how Botanic Gardens work, share material internationally. Again, access and transfer of technology. Again, we heard new initiatives in prior preservation, etc. this morning, becoming more ordinary, if you like, getting out of the lab into the interface for conservation. Some of the key things we've heard about: the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation, the Biodiversity Targets, and the recently negotiated Protocol on access and benefit sharing. Very important for us all. 2020 targets. 20 big targets are really, which are looking at core causes of biodiversity loss, trying to reduce the pressure on biodiversity, safeguarding it, enhancing the benefits to everyone that comes from biodiversity, and building capacity worldwide. Really big and impressive targets. GSPC we've heard of already, and it's one of the first major initiatives to come out of CBD, which was really pushed by Botanic Gardens to get some really good targets in there, initially for 2010, and Botanic Gardens were key to negotiating and key to getting it approved at the COP. And now we're moving on to 2020 targets. And Botanic Gardens worldwide are using this as a framework, really to plot their conservation and sustainable use programs. So it's very useful for us all as a family, Botanic Gardens, to have structures like this that really we can talk to each other in a sense that becomes an international language. ABS, access and benefit sharing, very important internationally, very important for biodiversity-rich countries. Recently concluded, after long negotiations, the protocol. It's now signed by 92 countries. I think 29 have ratified. It needs, I think, 50 ratifications. Hopefully, that will speed up this year before for the major constant parties for CBD, and hopefully it will come into effect soon after that. The text is agreed, but again, the key point within the Biodiversity Convention and Protocol is what happens nationally. We're still really looking at what the protocol will mean to us at Botanic Gardens, where we work internationally, sharing material, moving it across the world, researching on it, building capacity, sometimes having to link to commercial companies, looking at new initiatives, etc. So we probably, some of the areas we'll be looking at is new procedures for access to genetic resources, more formal agreements. Many of us already use quite formal agreements in our relationships. Clear distinction between commercial and non-commercial use. Increased interest in the use of ex-situ collection for bioprospecting, you may see. More tracking and reporting of how we move material and what we do with it. We may be asked to be used as a checkpoint, for example, in the use of non-commercial material as we work with Botanic Gardens. And again, it facilitates, I think, the need to work in partnership, to talk to each other, and to understand how these complex processes work on a basic day-to-day issue, whether it be a small Botanic Garden or a large Botanic Garden. And the importance of best practice, really sharing agreements, sharing codes of conduct, between ourselves, Botanic Gardens, and also with the partners that we have a relation with. So that was quite a quick run through the Biodiversity Convention to try and catch up in time. But really, the important thing about the CBD is it's a framework which allows us to work internationally, to speak the same language of conservation, sustainable use, and active development sharing. It's there to strengthen our partnership. It's there to help us gain funding and build trust. On the other hand, CITES is now well into middle age. It's over 40 years old, celebrated 40 years last year, and it originated from a resolution from IUCN. Base of CITES is very simple. It aims to regulate international trade and monitor it, and ensure that that trade does not threaten the plants and animals as a result. Very simple, the core convention is prescriptive, it's more old-fashioned, prescriptive. It lays down set things we have to do as parties. Appendix 1 lists the species which are most threatened, most endangered, which are not allowed to trade commercially. Appendix 2, year-round, timber from Indonesia, Malaysia, orangutan corn, which is allowed to trade. Appendix 2, but it must be sustainable, it must be legal. And all the trade is covered by permits. Appendix 3 looks at the more simple form of regulation for certain species proposed by countries where they're nationally protected. The authorities in the country are basically management authority who deals with the paperwork, normally a ministry, who issues the CITES permit. A scientific authority which gives the advice on whether that trade is sustainable. CITES Secretariat based in Switzerland, and of course the enforcement authority, maybe customs or other important agencies working at the border, and police internally as well, for CITES in the UK, for example. Again, it's a familiar UN system. The competent parties make decisions. There's two technical committees, plants and animals, with experts elected on a regional basis. The biologist colleagues from Kuwait is a regional representative covering this area. Standing committees are more small. It runs the convention between the competent parties. Secretariat, as I said, and then backed by UNA, strong interaction and input from agencies like IUCN, World Conservation Monitoring Centre, traffic, if you like, the trade based on WWF. The basis of CITES really is the paperwork, the permit. The permit is a statement of two things for Appendix 2 species listed. permit is issued by a national authority based on the advice of a scientific authority. And the permit says the trade is legal, and the permit says the trade is sustainable. Now, when it was originally negotiated in the 70s, we didn't talk about sustainability as a word. So the term they used was non-detrimental. Trade should not be detrimental. So this is this important finding that the scientific authority makes to a management authority when you're exporting a species, an orchid, timber, medicinal plant, non-detrimental finding. It's non-detrimental to the status of that plant or animal in the wild. Listing of species, unlike CBD voting occurs. While a conference of the parties, this one was in Doha a number of years ago, they vote to list species, and you need a 2/3 majority to do that. Everything in CBD is done by consensus, and recently moved to electronic voting, which is a lot less reliable than old-fashioned putting your hands up. The size of the non-detrimental finding, one of the flaws of CITES, one of the areas where it's important nationally to build resources is that when the convention was set up, there was no fund set up to help countries gather the information to decide whether trade was sustainable or not. So this was a major problem. And the first attempts of guidance, given that it goes back to 1974, did not appear until 2002. And more recently, Mexico coordinated a major international meeting, bringing experts from people who work with sharks, or elephants, cacti and succulents and medicinal plants together to come up with some recommendations. And only now is there funding going in to work from the bottom up to produce guidance on how can we say trade is sustainable. So this NDF process is now working its way through the system. And that's something I think our Botanic Gardens and Botanical Institutes can work on, finding that basic information, whether something is sustainable or not. The challenges that we've seen in CITES is that in the years since it was brought together, it's moved from horticultural trade, big groups originally listed for orchids and cacti, but now in the conference of parties, you see much more medicinals, pharmaceuticals, and timber. Timber at the last COP was a major issue, as was sharks, etc. Marine species. In areas where you have huge levels of trade, often illegal, for example, Ebonies and Rosewoods from Madagascar going out for furniture trade. All Ebonies and Rosewoods were listed from Madagascar. To put this in context, there are currently described about 84 species of Ebonies from Madagascar. Colleagues in Missouri think it's about 220 species, only one of which is non-endemic. Gives you an idea of the sheer diversity of Madagascar. Building these things together, because of Botanic Institutes, Botanic Gardens, we can work and help do the research, produce the tools to identify these species and generate trade. There's colleagues from our team, we have a full-time team based in Madagascar, local scientists, and the hardest job here was taking borings from the diasporas. The ebony was so strong, I can't tell you how many of these they broke, but they're very strong arms. More interesting things being listed, going into the medicinal world, for example, rosewood oil, Aniba, which is very important for our background in fragrances, perfumes. We see it imported in the UK for Lush, for example, to use soaps, etc. Massage oil, shampoo. You've seen more and more of these tags being listed. It's very complicated to control, as you can imagine, extracts of oils and timber. And this is a picture of it from a colleague, Terry Pennington, in Habitat, where you can see how exploitation can occur of a species which is relatively not that frequent in the forest. And the way that they did it, and pretty much non-sustainably, unfortunately, was that they moved around. This was no distillation, mobile distillation. So they would move around these distillation engines, steam engines, through the forest, camped by a group of the rosewood tree, Aniba, the challenge of sustainable trade. One of the things we like to do is work in partnership in CITES, as our role in the UK as scientific authority, and very frequently have colleagues from overseas. We've got colleagues from CITES China who work with us for 6 months. And it's important to see both ends of the trade, huge trade from China in medicinal plants. But if you look at the challenge of monitoring that trade, this is the UK's major, Felix, the UK's major container port. Modern container ships can hold, say, 7,000 to 8,000 containers. That's the contents of one container, and that's the contents of one box. It takes a full day just to check one container. One ship with, say, 7,000 containers, you can see the problem you're dealing with monitoring trade, regulating trade. We've tried to work using our work with customs and enforcement agencies, produce tools which are designed for customs officers, police, people who need quick, and if you like, quick and dirty guides to enforcement and monitoring, which allows them to risk analyze, to get to the area where they decide, do we need to bring in an expert? Do we need to send this piece of wood to Cuba to be identified, for example? And we do training worldwide in these areas, and some of those might well be adapted for use in the region here. For example, granite timber, more recently cacti, cycads, but we've done a range of other guides with PowerPoint presentations and training tools attached, which can be amended to suit your local conditions. So CITES is still an important tool to use to promote sustainable use. It helps build capacity in country and region to implement the convention. That's something that's important to do. I think here you can play an important role in the region in doing that. Botanic Gardens, good at communication, good at partnership. And it's an important tool in botanical education. The story of what plants are used for and the different forms and how they travel the world can be really a potent tool when you're teaching children. You know, if you teach in Britain the snooker cue is made from ramen, which comes from an orangutan swamp forest in Malaysia, it's an interesting story. Or the oil which covers, or the lipstick wax, which is used, comes from Euphorbia anticertifica, wild collected in Mexico, which is also used in the glaze on apples, which is also used as a wax in your car, and which is